Okay, so now let's take a look at the late follicular phase. So I just want to remind you that at this point, what we have happening is we have one dominant follicle remaining, and it's secreting a lot of estrogen to basically self-promote itself, so stimulate its self-development, okay? What happens during the late follicular phase, it's a pretty crazy thing that happens during the late follicular phase, is that estrogen switches from providing negative feedback onto GnRH secretion to providing positive feedback on GnRH secretion. So remember, in the early follicular phase, we had estrogen providing negative feedback on GnRH secretion. Now in the late follicular phase, estrogen is providing positive feedback on GnRH secretion. And the mechanism for this is not understood. We have no idea. Well, I guess that probably some people have some idea why. But we really don't understand what is responsible for this switch. But for some reason, we have estrogen switching to becoming a positive stimulator of GnRH secretion. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is consider this question. So now that we have positive feedback on GnRH secretion, what are the consequences of that going to be? So go ahead and hit pause if you need to, or just think about it for a little while. Okay, so positive feedback on GnRH secretion is going to lead to surges in LH and FSH secretion, right? So just to remind you, GnRH is going to stimulate FSH and LH secretion. Since we are stimulating GnRH secretion, we are going to stimulate FSH and LH secretion. However, we are actually going to end up stimulating LH secretion more than we're going to stimulate FSH secretion. So that's what's shown here is the different hormone levels during the different phases of the menstrual cycle. Right here is the part that we're looking at, and you can see that there is a much larger, what we call an LH surge during the late follicular phase than there is an FSH surge, okay? And you don't really need to know the reason for this, but just for those of you who need something to hold on to understand that that's actually due to this negative feedback right here from inhibin. So LH doesn't have that, FSH does have that, so FSH levels are lower. Okay. All right, so we have this LH surge. I keep saying LSH. We have this LH surge, and it's going to trigger a couple main events in the ovaries, okay? One is that we are going to get our first meiotic division. So just to remind you, up to this point, our oocyte is in this stage. It's in the primary oocyte stage where it has undergone one DNA replication, but it hasn't undergone any cell divisions yet. Okay, so the LH surge is going to trigger that first meiotic division to give rise to our secondary oocyte, which has less genetic material, right? And our first polar body, which is going to die off. Okay. After that, what is going to happen is ovulation. Okay, so the LH surge is going to promote follicular rupture. So basically what happens in ovulation, or what causes ovulation basically, is a buildup of that antral fluid that we've been having all along, okay? And also we get a weakening of the wall of the follicle until eventually the buildup of fluid inside is going to cause the wall to burst, and that then is going to release the oocyte. So again, this is the oocyte that just divided, okay? So that's what happens during ovulation. I also just kind of want to give you a preview of what's happening next. So after ovulation, we have our cells of the follicle, the thecal and the granulosa cells, starting to migrate inward and transforming into kind of a different cell type called the luteal cells, and they form this body called the corpus luteum. Okay, and the corpus luteum is going to begin to secrete progesterone. So I have a quick question for you here. What is the effect of luteinization? Sorry, I didn't even say that word. Luteinization is the name for this process of turning into the corpus luteum. What is the effect of luteinization on estrogen secretion? So think about that for a second. Okay, so hopefully you were able to figure out that if we no longer have our follicular cells in their kind of original form, they're going to stop secreting estrogen. Um, and that's going to have implications for the next phase of the menstrual cycle. In the meantime, they're going to change into these cells that secrete progesterone, and that also is going to dictate what's going to happen in the next phase of the menstrual cycle. So stay tuned. Okay, so that was what happens in the ovaries during the late follicular phase. We had our LH surge, we had our first meiotic division, we had ovulation. Let's take a look at what happens in the uterus at this same time. Okay, so that's basically right here in the uterine cycle. And essentially, nothing really new is happening. We're just kind of continuing to do what we were doing before. So remember, before we had estrogen being secreted by our follicles, and that was stimulating proliferation of the endometrium. We have the same thing happening here in the late follicular phase. So we have continued estrogen secretion from our dominant follicle, stimulating proliferation of the endometrium.